Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How to Stop Excessive Absenteeism from Undermining Your Business. My name is Jamie Lizotte. I'm the HR and Tax Solutions Compliance Manager here at ComplyRight, and today I'm going to be both your host and presenter on the webinar. So welcome everybody and good afternoon. And before we get started, I do want to go over some house rules. You guys can use the chat box on the left to ask any questions that you have. We will do our best during the webinar to answer any technical questions that come in, and then any other questions that are pertaining to the webinar topic we're talking about today. Those will be held for the Q&A session at the end of my presentation. Also, just to let you know, audio from today's presentation will be coming through your computer speakers. So in order to make sure that you have a good audio experience, you want to make sure your speakers are turned on and that you also have the volume up. Also, if you are signed in more than once, that will affect how you hear the webinar and your audio experience. So we just ask that you locate the duplicate login and close that out. And then lastly, we want to let everybody know that you will receive a copy of the slides from today's webinar and an email that will follow within the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for that email as the slides will be included in it. Okay, now in a perfect workplace, really employee absences would always be scheduled well in advance, or we would hope they would be, right? But you know the drill. Carl calls out with no notice regularly, Hannah has headaches every other Monday, and Clyde claims that family emergencies are way too often. Now, excused absences are one thing, but when they're unplanned or excessive, they can actually negatively impact your productivity and the profits of your business. So today, I'm going to give you a better understanding of the typical reasons behind unnecessary time off, why it matters, and also the steps that you can take as an owner or an HR individual in the company to prevent it. And at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to know how to better manage your employee attendance and also keep your absenteeism from getting out of hand. So specifically today, we're going to cover the hidden costs of excessive absenteeism. We'll also talk about some practical ways to prevent the problems, and then also how to recognize legally protected absences under the federal laws, which is very important. We'll talk about some popular options for PTO accrual, and then lastly, we'll talk about the importance of a formal attendance policy as well as consistent tracking in order to help you manage that attendance. Now, before we get started, I do want to start with a poll, and I want to hear from all of you as the attendees. Is unscheduled absenteeism currently a problem in your business? And I'm going to give everybody about a minute or so to answer the question. So your options are, yes, it's a major problem in my company now. Yes, somewhat of a problem, maybe not major. No, it's not a problem, or I'm not sure. So let's see the results as we have them coming through. And we see, yes, somewhat of a problem with 57% right now, so a little more than half. But we also have in our yes, it's a major problem, almost 30%. So hopefully the information that we're going to be sharing with you today, for those that say yes, it's a major problem, or yes, even somewhat of a problem, you'll be able to at least take a few pointers and few tips and tricks to take back to your companies and help you manage that and get that under control. Okay, so let's get forward. Now, truth is stranger than fiction when it comes to employee excuses for missing work. Accidentally eating cat food, being blocked in by police, the dreaded duck bite. These are excuses that actual employees use for needing a day off, and that's according to a survey by CareerBuilder. So, we all think, and I'm sure you all thought as I was saying that, and were probably chuckling to yourselves, while these explanations are rather ridiculous and hilarious, employee absenteeism is really no laughing matter, especially for small business owners, because like I mentioned at the beginning, that's what can cost your business money and keep you from gaining profits. So as you can see, some of these you can just make, you just can't make up. Some of them may be true, but either way, these are the excuses that employees are actually calling in with these days. And I wish we had more time to share some of your outrageous excuses from your employees, but instead, because I'd be more than glad to hear what some of our attendees hear on a daily basis. But instead, what we want to talk about today is how we overcome, how we prepare, and hopefully actually create an environment in our companies where this doesn't occur. So first, we want to start with defining exactly what is employee absenteeism. Now, we can all assume it is when an employee misses work, which definitely the answer is yes, but actually there are two types of absenteeism. There's planned absenteeism and there's unplanned absenteeism. Now, while you expect employees to miss a certain number of days each year, you're dealing with a different situation if that time is actually unscheduled, if it becomes excessive, or if it's not properly captured. So scheduled absences, for example, those would be the absences that consist of vacation time, planned vacation time, or personal time. So that's when they're actually requesting time off in advance. Now, normally, this type that's requested time off and scheduled, that time off is budgeted as a payroll expense, and it doesn't pose a problem to companies. Now, unscheduled absences, on the other hand, those may include arriving late to work, leaving early, taking longer breaks or lunches than allowed, or even not showing up at all. Because obviously those little things add up. So if you have an employee that constantly is tardy in your business, shows up 15, 20 minutes every day, that 20 minutes adds up. And obviously that's probably 20 minutes less that they're not working, unless they're making up that time on the back end. Now, in the typical workplace, unscheduled absenteeism can range from 5 to 10%, meaning as many as 1 in 10 workers is absent when they should be working. That's quite a bit, especially if you're a small business when you only have 10 employees in your business. Now, it does vary by industry, with healthcare and retail experiencing the highest rates of absenteeism. Unscheduled time off in general can disrupt any business because obviously, especially if that individual that has a lot of unscheduled absenteeism is a core employee and is working on things that you need on a daily basis to run your business. Now, it can also really affect the overall morale of your business because as we all know, when someone's not there to do their work, what happens? Another employee has to pick up the slack. Especially, just as I mentioned, if that's a core employee and they're in charge and they have responsibilities that need to happen in order to run your business on a daily basis, then somebody needs to be there to do that work on a daily basis. So let's go ahead and look at some real employee absence statistics. Now, CareerBuilder's recent survey on employee absences uncovered some interesting numbers. And the study actually found that 40% of workers have called in sick when they weren't. They needed just a day off or they were tired or whatever the case is, didn't want to go to work. That's a lot though, 40%. So you have people that are taking time off unscheduled at the last minute when they're not necessarily needing to. 38% of employers have checked on a sick worker to verify they were really ill, and 26% have fired someone for using a fake excuse. So that's a pretty large number as well. And another one is 43% of employers have caught an employee lying about being sick by checking out their social media posts. The number one thing that employees do, they call out sick and go to the beach. And of course, everybody's doing it nowadays. Everything is shared on social media, from the meals that you eat to your activities on a daily basis. So that's a great way to see exactly what's going on with employees, especially when things like that happen. But that's quite a bit, 43% were lying about being sick. Now, and the last statistic I want to share with you is over 1/3 of workers have come into the office sick instead of staying home so they can save their sick days. So that's a pretty good number as well that are working sick. But in that case, sometimes when you really should be sick, you don't want to get your other your other colleagues sick and stuff like that. But they're trying to save their sick days in the meantime. So why do employees call in sick? That's a good question, especially if we see, based on the statistics we just shared before, they're not really sick and they're faking it. Well, one of the biggest mistakes that employers make is not understanding why unplanned absenteeism happens in the first place. And Career Builder's study also provided interesting insight to this. And according to the participants that took the study, that participated in the study, 30% took the day off to go to a doctor's appointment where they may not have actually been sick, but they needed to take care of a health issue. So they had something to do outside the office. 23% said they just didn't feel like going to work. Probably something I'm sure we hear more often than not. 20% said they needed to relax. Maybe things are overwhelming at the office. 15% said they needed to catch up on sleep. 14% took the day off to run personal errands. 8% needing to catch up on housework. And 8% also said they had plans with family and friends. So as you can see, these are all unplanned. That definitely some of these, they could have been planned. And communication amongst employees and the managers and so forth is something that could help. Now, obviously, the underlying theme here, and I'm sure everybody on would agree, is I need time for myself. And that's what the employees are saying. We all, and I'm sure everybody can agree, we all have days where we'd rather not work. So we can all relate. But we have to be careful with our empathy. If you unintentionally allow regular, what I'll say is me time absenteeism, chances are going to be that you'll probably experience more and more of it. And that's where you have to be a little bit careful, because you don't want your employees to take advantage of the fact that you're empathetic to their needs. And that's where obviously communication comes in too. Now, but another part of understanding the trends of absenteeism with your employees is really knowing and having a relationship with them. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about communication. Sometimes it's not just time off they need for themselves, but they actually have things that are going on in their lives. And we all know that we have life outside of the company. We have life outside of work. And, that life goes beyond the 40 hours our employees give to our businesses. They have lives and they have families outside. And in our companies, creating a culture of openness and getting to know your employees will really help them to share these things with you, so that you can work with them to avoid these unexpected absences, but also provide a culture and work environment that shows that you care about the employee outside the business as well. And that can obviously, in turn, affect their productivity overall and in their morale. So another startling statistic I want to share with you, and this is really going to resonate. According to a study by Circadian, unscheduled absenteeism cost $3,600 per year for each hourly worker and $2,650 each year for salaried employees on average. Now, if that's for each hourly worker or salaried worker, times that by the number of employees you have in your company, and that's going to be a figure that's probably going to be extremely startling to you. So that's why it's really important. If you employ 10 hourly workers, that's $36,000 a year erased from your bottom line. That's not a little chunk of change. That's actually could be somebody's salary that's working in your company, right? So very scary. That's something you want to say yikes to, and that's why we're talking about getting that under control. So let's explore the financial impact in more detail now. Now, in blue-collar environments, and that's where most workers are paid hourly, payroll costs increase when employees use PTO because they often need to be replaced while they are out. Now, and that's going to be either by contractors or temporary employees, or even through reallocation of the existing workforce, meaning other employees are covering for them while they're out. For salaried workers, on the other hand, the situation is different. Salaried employees typically are not replaced when they are absent, so the direct payroll costs are really limited to the hours lost while the employee is out. However, these absences really can impact a company's ability to meet customers' demands and then also generate revenue. So their absences definitely don't go unnoticed either. Now, what I mentioned earlier about having other employees pick up the absent employee slack while they're out is obviously decreasing the overall morale of the company. So that's important. And it could possibly even create a vicious cycle for the company, because if you think about it, if employees continually have to pick up for another employee that is not there, eventually those employees are going to get burned out. They're going to get tired. They're going to want time off. Hence, that's not fixing your situation at all, but even possibly making it worse. So we talked about a couple slides back some excuses that employees are using. They need more sleep. Well, think about if you have employees that are taking on more work because other people are out. If they constantly see that other person is out, nothing's happening to that other person, especially if they're not on some sort of leave or anything like that, then that's definitely going to affect, their morale, and then that's gonna put a bad taste in their mouth for them to have to continually do work for the other person that's not there. And then they start possibly calling out saying, I need a day off, I'm tired. So in addition, to the financial impact, there are other consequences of unplanned absenteeism. And those consequences can include, we just mentioned lower morale due to increased workloads. That's definitely, employees can see that as unfair. Frustrated employees and supervisors, definitely that's a lot more for the managers and supervisors to handle the individuals unscheduled, because now they have to, if you have shifts in your company, cover the shifts, call people to get them to cover the shifts, make sure the work is being done if the hourly workers, or, make sure that things are still being covered, even if it's a salaried worker, because, again, you want to make sure you're still meeting customers' demands so you can generate that revenue. Loss of productivity and missed deadlines. Reduction of services because you have fewer employees to do the work, especially if you want to make sure that you don't overwork your other employees. Negative word of mouth by unhappy customers, because obviously if you have loss of productivity and you're missing deadlines, you're not able to meet your customers' demands, that's not going to be a positive coming on the outside from those customers, and they're going to share it with other people they know. Another one is decreased product quality because your staff is overworked, or you could be relying on temps that are not familiar with their business. So now instead of having the quality work that you're used to, they're trying to pick up the slack and do their work plus somebody else's, so that quality starts to decrease. And then obviously that can trickle down to customer effectiveness, or the customer's unhappy with the product of the quality of the product that you're delivering. Increased risk for on-the-job injury due to fatigue, very serious and very dangerous. Your employees that are being overworked, picking up other people's work, in order for them to maybe trying to rush to get jobs out, or they're being tired, not being as safe. And then the last thing is employee turnover because they get tired of picking up the slack. They just don't want to do it anymore. They find that nothing's happening, nothing's changing, so they just end up leaving because they're tired of it. So, besides those additional consequences, we want to talk about the hidden soft costs too. And those can be the amount of time spent annually by you and your managers making sure the shifts are covered, like I mentioned earlier. Clients are served and deadlines are met. That's extra work that you're going to pick up, or you're going to have to make sure it's covered. And then there's overtime. So when you have to pay shift workers time and a half because other workers called out sick, those costs can add up to substantial numbers. So if you say you're going through a period right now where overtime is not affordable in your company, or you're not having anybody work overtime, if you have a lot of unscheduled absenteeism, that could change quickly, especially, if you don't want to overwork your employees and allow them to spread their time out a little bit to get the job done and make sure that they're still producing quality products. So what can you do to address the problem? That's the big question. And the first step that you want to do is you want to conduct an internal audit to find out if you're either encouraging or you're discouraging absenteeism within your company. And some questions you want to ask yourself when you're doing this internal audit are, what are the primary drivers of employee absenteeism? Why are they calling in? What are the excuses that you're getting when they're calling in? Have you actually sat down and have a conversation with those employees that are, that individual that's calling out every single Monday after a holiday or something like that, or, has a headache every Thursday morning or things like that? So the second question you want to ask is it employee choice? Maybe employees feel they can take time off simply because they can get away with it. And if they do, what can you do about that? And we are going to talk about this in a later slide, so I won't jump into that too much. But there is stuff that you can do about it. Just keep in mind. The next question you want to ask is it driven by your workplace environment? For example, do your employees feel overworked? That they feel entitled to a day off now and then? And again, how can you make changes to handle this? And the last question, is it due to family or social influences? And maybe they feel you should cut employees with children more slack than those without kids. Those are, those are things that you need to understand, where you need to build better communication with your employees to understand where they're coming from, understand their wants and their needs. Again, you want to be empathetic, but we don't want to be over-empathetic, so we have to be careful there. Also, do health-related behaviors contribute to absenteeism? If so, do you have a wellness plan in your company that encourages healthier choices? Do you offer incentives in the company to participate in wellness programs? And the last question is, what is your culture surrounding absenteeism? Does your company tolerate it because everyone needs time off now and then? Or do you tolerate it because you don't know how to manage it any differently? It's a struggle and you're just trying to manage your company day by day. Now, once you've analyzed your company culture and kind of what's happening and answered these questions, then it's really time to consider the steps that you can take to affect change. But really doing the digging here and the understanding is the most important in order for you to effectively move forward. So first things first, communication is key. And that's kind of been one of my key things that I'm sure you've heard me say over and over in this webinar. It's critical that you create two-way channels to share information and understanding between the employees and the management. You want a culture that builds relationships and openness. You want your employees to be able to talk to you, and you want to be able to talk to your employees. You want them to understand the policies within the company, and you also want to be able to understand that, again, empathetic. They do have the lives outside of the company, but when they're at work, they need to be here. This is a job. They do help run the company. And employees will buy into your goal of reducing unexpected absenteeism once they understand that it's a necessity for success. And obviously, when employees understand that, when a company succeeds, employees benefit. So when they see that same picture that you're painting, they'll get it. So you want to make sure that you address the issue with your staff. You can schedule a meeting so you can discuss the issue, share the impact that unexpected absences have on the business, and walk your staff through the process that you go through to make sure a shift is covered, so they can see exactly what is experienced on a day-to-day basis and really the hassle that it causes. And then make sure that you also ask for feedback. This is very important. And according to a SHRM report on employee satisfaction, respectful treatment of all employees at all levels and trust between employees and senior management were the two top contributors to satisfaction. And I'm going to read that one more time. Respectful treatment of all employees at all levels and trust between employees and senior management were the two top contributors to satisfaction. So as I mentioned, that talks all about communication and an openness and a culture that has an open relationship between management and the employees. So encouraging your staff to help you solve problems will also positively impact their jobs because they are going to feel a part of that. You want to ask for their ideas and their solutions to address the issue. Make them a part of it. And again, I hate to be redundant because I keep saying it, but it's so important that having a culture of openness and building relationships between employees and management, your employees will actually feel more comfortable sharing their feedback and their ideas with you. And that's going to be key to helping you institute change. Now, the next step here, you've done the digging, you've had some meetings. The next is to make sure that you value personal and family commitments. So this is where we're talking about being empathetic. And we did touch upon it a little bit earlier. But you want your employees to know. Don't just say it. Make sure that they know and feel and understand that you care about their personal lives. Take the time to learn about what they do outside of work. Do they have daycare time frames or a parent who requires special care? And these chats also present an opportunity for you as a business owner or manager to find out which employees want to step up if you do need someone to cover a shift. Maybe that's a chance for them to gain some overtime or get new experiences if they're looking to grow. And not all employees want to work overtime, while others look for every opportunity to earn that additional money. So that's a chance for you to really kind of plan ahead for those unplanned absences in a sort of way. And another thing to consider is wellness. By providing educational opportunities about healthier lifestyle choices, you really have an opportunity here to reduce those health-related absences that we talked about earlier. And at the same time, employees who work overtime to cover for those who do call out, they can become mentally and physically exhausted. So you also want to make sure while those individuals are willing to step up and cover for someone calling out, that you're paying attention to that as well. And you can address that by getting your team focused on healthy living and watching the extra hours that they may be pulling if you need it. And then lastly, but most important, you need to have an absenteeism policy. I can't stress this enough. But a formal policy really lets you establish those attendance rules. And you want to make it perfectly clear that excessive absence abuse will not be tolerated in your company. Make sure that you share the policy with the employees and make sure that you also enforce the rules consistently. You want to be fair across the board because obviously being unfair would affect your morale. And you want to make sure that you're taking that policy seriously because if you're not enforcing it and taking it seriously, then your employees are not going to. And I'm going to discuss in just a few slides exactly what you should include in that policy. So for those attendees, if you don't have a policy, you'll definitely want to make sure that you listen to what you need to include. And if you do have a policy, this could just be a good little brush up to make sure you have everything you need in there. So now, before we move into the next portion of the presentation, I want to take a quick break and ask one last poll. And I'm going to ask for you to share with us, how does your business currently handle time off? Do you have a separate sick, vacation, and personal time? Do you have PTO, or do you have some other sort of program? And I'm interested to see what most people offer. It's a cross between PTO, separate sick, vacation, and personal, where some companies still offer the choice of either. and that's actually in the lead. So they're sticking with the former, and we have the not sure, where it can be some other sort of leave that they have. All right, and for everybody that shared, thank you for sharing that information. So now let's move into the next section, and we're going to talk about time off banks. So as we see on from the poll, a lot of our attendees are using the sick, vacation, and personal time, and some are using PTO, and some have another version that they use. Now, if you still have separate vacation and sick days at your company, you're definitely going to want to listen to this. Paid time off programs eliminate the need to get approvals for a certain category of absence, like a sick day. So that kind of alleviates what you need to do if you're a company that has separate sick, vacation, and sick days. Now, instead, what PTO does is it provides employees really a block of time to use however they wish. So whether they want a vacation with a family or take Fridays off in July, the choice is really theirs. And some of the other benefits of a PTO program that you may want to consider: employees are more likely to give advance notice for requests because they no longer need to justify the need for paid days off. So they're willing to share that information in advance so that it can be accurately planned. Consequently, also, employers can plan in advance and avoid those scheduling gaps, as well as the cost of hiring temporary workers. So if you know that somebody's going to be, they need a time off to run errands one day, they'll let you know ahead of time, especially if they know they don't necessarily need to tell you the details about why they just need a day off. So a lot of those excuses we talked about in one of the previous slides can be taken care of with that PTO. Another benefit is morale and productivity improve as your other employees feel less burdened by last-minute absences. Also, maintaining only one type of time off plan means less tracking and administrative hassles for supervisors. So that's a good thing on your part. And also, it can help employee retention. PTO really is an added benefit for those employees who rarely take sick days. And they actually end up with more time off, which is perceived as a benefit. So those are some interesting cases for PTO and some benefits to consider if you don't have a PTO plan now. Now, talking about deciding an accrual method. If you're setting up a PTO program, you also need to decide on an accrual method. And that's going to be asking yourself, how are my employees going to accrue time off? And many employers actually use a yearly accrual rate because of its simplicity. You determine how many days employees should get per year, and then you give them a lump sum. For example, every January 1st, your employees get 15 PTO days to use throughout the year. Very easy to keep track of. Now, accruing time by hours worked is another popular method, and that time off reflects the actual time worked at your company. And this can definitely get complicated because what you're doing here is giving a certain number of hours off for hours that are worked. And if you use this method, you should really consider using some sort of automated tracking system to then remove the burden that you have to do it manually. I can only imagine that would be a nightmare if you're tracking the hours that every employee in your company, even if it's only 10 employees, you're tracking all their hours they worked each week, especially if they're not hourly, and then adding their time off each week that they work those hours. Now, just because you're using PTO, it doesn't mean that you still can't inquire about time off requested. Because I mentioned, with the benefits of PTO, the employees don't have the burden of sharing why they need a day of time, why they need that time off. But you can still inquire about it. And if you're considering denying time off, then it is very important that you understand their reason for the request before you deny any time off. If an employee asks for time off for any of the reasons listed, and as you can see on the slide, then you may be required by law, depending on the company size, your company location, as well as some other factors, to actually grant that time off. So that means you cannot deny it. And it really depends on, like I mentioned, the size of your business, where you're located, and other factors. So you definitely want to check your state and local laws in order to make sure that you're following all the legal requirements. So this is definitely important to understand why they're asking for that time off. And some of those potentially protected absences could include birth, adoption, or becoming a foster parent, medical or health-related issues, and that's including caring for a sick relative or partner, workers' compensation, injury, or proceedings, even donating blood, an organ, or bone marrow, a religious holiday or practice, a military service obligation, caring for a disabled service member, jury duty or witness responsibilities, voting in an election would constitute approved time off, certain volunteer work that they do, and also attending a child's school activities. So, sometimes it's before, if say that you have a major project going on in the company and employees are requesting PTO. Maybe that's a blackout period that you have in the company where they know they shouldn't request the time off. And if somebody does go beyond to say, hey, I need this time off, and they know that it's a blackout period, then maybe that's an area where you would definitely want to question that so that you know you're not denying something that is federally approved. And it's also important that you know the general reason for employee absences, but that doesn't mean you need to know every detail. However, you do need to know if your employee needs time off for jury duty or voting, for example, like I just mentioned, so that you know if there are legal requirements you have as an employer to approve the time off. You cannot deny it. So you should always really require a general reason anytime an employee requests time off, and this is going to alert you if if that absence reason could be a legally protected absence. And I'm also going to share with you some additional tips for tracking those absences. What you should do is record the absence reasons, and again, that's even if you have a PTO program. Also, make tracking attendance every supervisor's job. You want to make that consistent across the board. Obviously, that creates fairness and it's good for the morale of the employees. And it helps, obviously, to know what's going on with all employees in the company. Also, identify excessive absenteeism or tardiness and address the issue with the employees. You should do that immediately as soon as you see that there's an issue. Because maybe the employee thinks that they're doing it and it's okay, and they don't see a problem, so they're going to continue to do it. But until you address the problem, you're not going to see what's coming from the employee side of you. And also recognize when absences are protected by law, most definitely, in order to make sure that you are maintaining compliance. And finally, we talked about this earlier, and I said I was going to get to the details. Make sure you have an official attendance policy. So I've already mentioned the importance of this. Like I said, if you do have a current policy, conduct a quick audit. This is a great time to do it to make sure it does contain the following. And if you don't have a policy, here's a start to what it should include. You should have employee work hours. This means you want to have what time does the company open and close? What times do you expect employees to work? And if you have various shifts in your company, list those there as well. Also, you want to mention call-out procedures. The call-out procedures are going to explain the process that your employees need to follow if they do need to call out unexpectedly. We do understand that's going to happen, so let's make sure that they understand the process and they know to follow that process. Also, available paid or unpaid leave. What this should explain is how much paid time employees have available, how often they accrue it, and what happens to the time off if it's not used at the end of the year. Does that time off roll over? And also, what if they leave the company? What happens to any leftover time? Is that paid out to them? Holidays should also be listed. You should list all the company holidays that are observed and which the company is closed and employees are not expected to work. That way they can also plan ahead themselves. List the FMLA leave. FMLA now typically applies to businesses with 50 or more employees, but you also want to look at your state laws, as those could be different. But if you do have to include FMLA leave, you want to document the process for requesting so that employees know exactly what to follow. You want to mention military leave, and this is where you're going to document the process of employees on how to request leave for military reasons. The leave of absence, this is where you're going to share the process for your employees to request any type of leave of absence, which is not considered a sick day, but actually a specified amount of time in which that employee may be out of the office. And that could be for having a baby or family or even health-related issues. You also want to mention any state or local laws. Listing any state or local laws your company is required to adhere to that provide employees' rights so that they are aware that you're following and you're compliant. And then also you want to mention the consequences for violating the policy. This is very important, and it's not only to have it listed in the policy, but also communicate it with your employees. They really need to understand what happens if they violate this policy. And when creating your consequences, you want to make sure that your policy doesn't create an automatic termination when an employee misses a certain amount of time. As you know, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, they may require time off as a reasonable accommodation. So you have to be careful there. But this means your policy should not specifically state that an employee will be terminated if he or she misses more than 2 or really any specific number of days. If the need for leave is due to a disability covered by the ADA, then employers may be required to see if a reasonable accommodation can be made. And a reasonable accommodation, that could include providing time off, even if all available PTO or other leave such as FMLA has been exhausted. And you also want to keep your policy flexible, but make sure that it's clear that excessive or unexcused absences or tardiness will not be tolerated. And there will be discipline, and appropriate discipline actually, up to and including termination. And again, follow through. So you want to make sure that once you have this policy, you clearly communicate it to your company policy, to your staff, and also have an acknowledgement that each employee received and read and understands the policy. So now you're making them a part of it. They receive and understand what you have instituted in the company. And the most important thing is to make sure that you follow through and you're consistent with adhering to it. Because like I mentioned before, if you institute something but you don't hold true to it, how can you expect your employees to? So it's very important there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, smaller businesses will soon be able to take advantage of fully integrated apps that work like a mini HRIS system, but at a much lower cost. Really with small businesses, you don't need everything that an HRIS offers. So you really just need the right tools to solve your pain points. And today we're talking about the pain point of excessive absenteeism. So HR Direct, the leading provider of HR solutions for smart employers, has recently launched a new concept in HR called Smart Apps. And it's simple and smart HR cloud software that fits your needs as a small business and your budget, most importantly. Each solution is only $60 per year with one exception. The Employee Records app, which works directly with the attendance calendar, is absolutely free. And that app helps you keep all your employee data organized in one secure place. And it offers employee self-service so employees can keep their contact information up to date themselves. So it's a great way to get started at no cost. But the great thing about the attendance calendar is that it helps you easily track employee attendance and help you spot those troubling patterns so you can have those conversations immediately with those employees. It also has a preset of absence codes that ensure your approach is consistent amongst all of your employees. You can also create additional absence codes that are specific to your business if they're not within the list. And it allows you to deduct used hours from an employee's time off bank in order to track their time. You can also provide managers access so that they can take care and manage their employees' time off, so all the employees aren't under one individual. So provide that, delegate that responsibility to managers and supervisors. And you can also access 4 years of an employee's attendance history once you've actually accrued that number of years in the system. So you can go back and look at trends that have happened to help you analyze when you're doing an audit of your company. There are also other apps on the platform that you can look at that do work with the attendance calendar. So if you would like to take a look, you can visit www.hrdirectapps.com or call 1-800-999-9111, and customer service will be glad to help you out there. So that is it. That concludes today's webinar. And now I'm going to move on to our live Q&A session, and we're going to answer some of the questions that came in during the presentation today. So the first question that we have was, how should I discipline an employee with excused absences? We just talked about having a policy in place and most definitely having the discipline procedure in the policy. So great question. And what I would say here is a first offense, usually warrants a verbal warning. However, if the problem occurs again, you might want to consider preparing a formal disciplinary write-up that would then go into the employee's personnel file. And obviously, depending on your company's employee attendance policy, you may issue a series of written employee warning notices as the problem escalates. Or you may decide termination is appropriate after a single written warning if the employee shows no effort toward improvement, as long as the absences that are occurring are not legally protected. So it's really up to you on the type of discipline that your company is going to institute. Progressive discipline is really great in implementing these types of issues. But again, one way to combat this and to really try to not have to go to this measure is to make sure you have that communication with those employees to understand the reason why they're having the excessive absenteeism issues. So you want to talk to them and understand. The next question we have is, why is it necessary to track employee absences? That's a great question, especially, if you don't feel like you have anything going on. Well, employee attendance tracking, obviously, you have to do it for hourly employees. You want to know the time that they're working, so you're going to automatically see that there. But it can help you spot those troubling patterns and address employee time and attendance problem early. So if you're not tracking attendance now, you may not think that there's a problem. But you might see numbers on your bottom line that are being affected, and you really can't pinpoint what's going on. And that could be your absence issue that you're not noticing. But if you were tracking, that would be able to help you pinpoint that immediately. And also, if you were to have a legal dispute or anything like that, whether it's about wages, a disciplinary action, or even termination, the records of your employee absences could serve as critical evidence to justify your business decisions. So documentation can go a long way for businesses, and it's so important that you have that and that you keep record of that, because especially when you're going in to have a conversation with an employee, when you have that hard concrete evidence that you've been keeping track of, there's really nothing that the employee can argue with. Or hopefully they're not going to try and argue too much with you when you have the evidence right in front of you. Our next question is, can I require all employees to clock in and out? And that's even salaried employees. Well, this is an interesting question, actually. And you can legally ask exempt employees to clock in and out, and exempt employees are also referred to as salary employees. But that's just as, and that is just as you require non-exempt employees to track their time. But, I would caution that since this isn't a typical practice, it could have a very negative impact on morale, especially of the salaried employees. But, to me, it really sounds like there's a trust issue here that needs to be addressed. And it's also a presumption, and I could be, that could be used against you if an employee challenges their exempt status, since they're really not supposed to be paid by the hour. However, if there is a business reason for tracking the time, like for a project allocation or a client billing, then that is definitely different. But I'd really look into why you are looking to track time for salaried employees, as opposed to not, but only keeping track of those hourly employees. So you just want to be careful there. The next question that we have, and we have time for just a couple more, can I have blackout dates when no employees are allowed to ask for time off? And I actually mentioned blackout dates a little bit towards the end, and the answer here is yes, it's perfectly legal to establish blackout periods. Every business has a busy season, and you need to make sure that you're at the top of your game during that busy season to make sure you're servicing your customers, you're meeting demands, you're meeting deadlines, and you want to make sure that you have the employees there to do it. So one thing to do is have your policy state that you do not allow employees to request time off during your busiest times of year. So put that in your policy. You should definitely make the reason and the dates for the blackout year clear, the blackout time clear to all of your employees, and then also ensure that the policy is enforced consistently. Again, not to be redundant, but the only thing that you have to consider here would be federally approved time off there that you can't say no to. And another question we have that came in, do I have to pay employees when they are on jury duty? This question here, I'm going to say it depends, and that's because many state and local laws require paid time off for employees that serve on juries. So these laws, often apply to employees participating in criminal and civil trials as a witness and voting in elections as well. So it's important that you really check your state and local laws here to make sure that you're compliant for where your business is located. And we have time for one more question I'm going to go over here, and it is, how much time off should new employees receive? Now, it's pretty standard here. The answer I'm going to give, I'm going to say it's pretty standard to give new employees about 10 days of paid time off a year. Although companies do have increased that to 15 days in order to attract top talent, so something that's trending. Typically, new employees really are allowed to take time off after a probationary period of either 30, 60, or 90 days. It depends what the companies have for a probationary period. Now, some companies, on the other hand, they do allow employees to take time off right from the start of employment. But you want to just remember that state and local laws may require that you actually give a certain number of days, and also will require at what point it accrues for new employees. So again, you want to check your state and local laws to make sure that you're following those laws to make sure that you are compliant. And that is all the time that we have for Q&A today. But don't worry, we are going to be doing a follow-up podcast where we'll answer more of the questions that came in during today's presentation. So keep an eye out for the email that's going to come within the next couple of days, because that will have a link to the slides as well as to the podcast. So before we sign off, I do want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. I hope you were able to gain some knowledge and take some things back to your company so that you can start working to combat that absenteeism problem that you're having. With that being said, keep an eye out for that email. You will receive the slides and a link to the podcast. And also keep an eye out for our next webinar in July. And as always, thank you for joining. Have a great afternoon. And until next time, happy complying.